I was listening to my last upload and I realized that I really didn't get the chance to delve into any part that I really wanted to. I scattered it. It was very what I call skittering. I skittered across a whole bunch of different topics without delving deeply into any of them. I think the basic thing that I wanted to get across was the relationship between the empire, the imperial structure of the politics and all the stuff that I'm trying to build with the revolution and all that, and its relation to my religion, because and its relation to the theory in general. So the difference between the Deus Ex Machina theory, which is agnostic, and actually, I guess I should say the original Deus Ex Machina theory was actually a atheist uh, theory, and so it starts with nothing, and then goes to indiscernibility, and then being, and then everything is linear in that progression from then on. That replaces God with nothing, so it's atheist, and it is causally linear the entire time, except the origin is still considered causally dynamic, with nothing creating nothing, and that's the dynamism. It's still inherent in that system, in that theory, irregardless of whether you start with nothing or if you start with all three and God. So the difference, though, between those two viewpoints is actually really vast, even though you can derive exactly the same theory from either of those origins and end up with the same result. The meaning of that result is completely different depending on which one you chose. If you chose the atheist view, the meaning is nihilism. If you choose the religious view, what I call lucidity, which is the idea that there is a God and that God caused causal dynamism to exist, which then caused all three of the absolutes to sustain each other after God, kind of bootstrapped them into existence. They didn't bootstrap each other, but in my lucid religion, I believe that God gave them the creative power to exist, and then they sustain each other after that point. So it's sort of like God flips the switch to turn the machine on, and the machine just keeps on ticking. And the reason that that's so important is because causal dynamism and the act of creativity and the virtues that I draw from that, they can be taken from either of those views. They can be taken either from the nihilistic view that everything starts with nothing and is eventually doomed to go back to nothing, as well as the idea that everything started with God. In either case, like I said, the result is the same. So the result is then that we draw our virtues from that creation, and that the creation is causally dynamic in either case. And because it's causally dynamic, it has those same components of independence, integration, and interactivity that make it causally dynamic. And that's also what makes things get created. And so they're both creative, but nihilistic creation is very different as far as meaning and context and value in comparison to the context that you would have if there was a God. So it's this. I consider them both to be the same theory because they both have the same three absolutes, and after the origin, they're both identical. You have the same linear progression from then on, but the way that those originated is either from nothing or from God or from something else, some indiscernible thing that we don't know what it is. But in any of those cases, we still end up with the same creation. So the religion that you choose, in my opinion, is which of those three do you lean more closely towards? And if you find yourself being exactly equal to all three of them, if somehow you either don't know anything about it to the point that you think that all three of them apply equally to you, which is impossible, or unless you don't know anything about any of those three, at which point they would be exactly equal. If you knew absolutely nothing, or if you knew absolutely everything, which you'd have to be God to do, the only way that you would have exactly equal relations to all three of those is if you just didn't know they existed. And that's only mental. The subconscious soul that's directing your mind is still going to lean towards one of those three, even though it doesn't know its name, even though it might gaff it off and say, oh, that doesn't even exist, or I don't care, or whatever it is that you think is going on, isn't. The soul that you have in your body, the soul that you have behind your mind that tells your mind what to think and how to feel about it, is already leaning towards one of those three, regardless of whether you know it or not. And that's what directs all of your thoughts and words and actions from then on. The only difference is, do you know that or not? But like I say, the system, thankfully, allows for all three, or like I said, even something beyond those, to exist. But if you're going to be part of the empire, it is assumed that you at least accept, although you may not understand or even agree, you at least accept and tolerate and comply with the assumption that the theory is correct. Regardless of how it originated, it would still have the same components, which are, for reality, we're using the measure of independence, integration, and interactivity. And then we're saying that from those three absolutes of nothing, indiscernibility, and being, which define independence, integration, and interactivity, from those, we also have the field of modality that includes all three, because they can't occupy the same place at the same time. They have to have their own modes, their own separate modes inside of a field of modality. And that has to be encased inside a field of anti-modality. And those three scales are what show us the dimensions of complexity that we can then measure reality with. So it assumes that that's true. When I build the scales of governance to reflect that, I have the empire reflected in anti-modality, which is the largest scale, and it's also the most generalized, and it also has purely negative, not negative meaning like bad, but negative meaning subtractive definitions, because it's antimodal. And the weird thing is that that is actually done for theoretical purposes, not for nobility, but weirdly and ironically, by doing that, it actually affords the greatest amount of freedom, because it doesn't tell you what anything is. It just tells you what things are not. It doesn't tell you what to believe in. It just tells you that there are certain things that can't be tolerated, but you can believe anything else. One of the things that is not tolerated is the belief in active nihilism, which is destroying everything in creation so that it gets reduced back to nothing. We don't do that because the result of that is equivalent to never having done it to begin with. If you do succeed in destroying everything, it just gets recreated again anyway. Because if I cause nothing to happen, then it's the same thing that happened at the beginning of time when nothing was caused to happen back then. So we just end up right back at the starting position. If we kill everybody off and we destroy all matter and the entire universe blows up and turns into a dark sea of heat death, it will amass an infinite amount of potential energy, because you cannot create or destroy energy. All this energy already exists. Just because it gets dispersed and diffused all throughout the universe doesn't mean it just gets obliterated. It's there. It's just in a latent form. It's like it's sleeping. And what happens is it builds inertia. And inertia just means that it doesn't change, which is exactly what heat death is. Heat death is when you've got every atom decays over time. And it decays because it scrapes against the ether that it's orbiting in, that it's swishing around in. And because of this scraping, it eventually will decay. There's nothing immortal in the universe. Everything decays. So these atoms eventually decay into quarks or subatomic particles. Those subatomic particles then decay into even smaller particles, which then decay into even smaller particles, all the way down to what is called heat death, where you've got particles that, when they decay, the last particle decays, and it decays as radiating heat all of the energy that used to make up of a particle has run out of steam, so to speak, and so then it just disperses as heat, and that heat eventually dissipates and it goes back to being cold again. So then what happens to all of that energy? So you had matter and it decayed into energy, heat, light, sound, stuff like that, changes in waves. That radiates off constantly, decaying the particle into a wave. And then everything ends up being waves, which is heat. And then all those waves die off, which is heat death. And then you've still got all the universe's energy, but there's no matter to contain it. And yet you can't destroy it either. And so what else can it do except gain inertia? And that inertial momentum is actually equivalent to mass, because mass is inertia. They're the same thing. Where there is inertia, there is mass. Where there is mass, there is inertia. So if we have inertia, then we must have mass. So then how much mass is there? An infinite amount, and we're right back to the Big Bang. So there is no way to destroy everything and then have it remain destroyed. And ironically, that's the only reason that the Empire dissuades it and says that you can't do it, is because it's impossible. Because the result is equivalent to never having done it to begin with. You just end up at the same position. If you do it, you just do it again, and then you do it again, and then you do it again, and it's pointless. It doesn't go anywhere. The only real choice is to not do it again and do something else. So that's what the Empire does. It just cuts to the chase and says, well, if you're going to do that, you're going to end up right back here anyway. Granted, it'll take 13.8 billion years to get back here, but you'll get back here anyway. So if you're going to do that, just skip it and we'll go and do something else. And so, I mean, it really does only cut out the most insane things from being done. Mass genocide, censorship, indoctrination, slavery, things like that are just completely outlawed because they don't progress or evolve or even allow for evolution and progression under those situations. It's not allowed. It's stagnated artificially because naturally we all want to evolve. Naturally we all want to change and grow and learn and experience novel stuff. If we get stuck in the same situation over and over and over again, it is against the policy of the Empire to allow anything to be done that puts us right back to the same position we were before we did it, because that's pointless. It's a waste of time. You just end up right back where you started. So, it's like Einstein said, if you do the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result, that's insane. It's a definition of insanity. So it's just basic stuff like that at the scale of antimodality, which is the scale of the Empire. And then just beneath that, you've got the field of modality, which is positively defined, so that the definition describes what is and not just what is not. And so then you've got positive definitions for what it is to be a person, what it is to commit an act, and what it is to consent. And that defines the basic moral system of the Confederation, not the Empire. The Empire only has the three virtues, which are derived directly from the three absolutes of nothing, indiscernibility, and being, and the traits thereof. So nothing has the traits of absolute independence and absolute integration, but also absolute non-interactivity. And that's what makes nothing nothing. And indiscernibility has absolute independence, but it doesn't have absolute integration. It has absolute disintegration and absolute interactivity. And being has absolute dependence, not independence, which makes it very distinct from nothing and indiscernibility, because being depends on those two to define what it is. And that's because being is just the span or distance between nothing and indiscernibility. It's the difference between them, literally. And that definition then is dependent upon nothing and indiscernibility. You have to have those first, and then you can form the definition for being. So quite contrary to Sartre's belief and most people's intuition, being borrows itself from nothing. Nothing does not borrow itself from being. Nothing is the default. Being is the evolution from the default. And that's the case because of my belief and insistence upon starting with the simplest and ending with the most complex. I find being to be exceedingly, if not infinitely, complex. Nothing, on the other hand, is exceedingly simple. Everybody can envision what nothing would be. It's just the absence of everything that is. But no one can conceive of the complete totality of being, of every possible thing in existence. No one can envision what that could be. There's things that we just have never experienced. But we can always take things away. We can always know what that is, because that's just an absence. So it's way simpler. And that's how the empire is built. The empire is, like I said, defined negatively, just like nothing is defined negatively. But it is still a definition. And it does tell us what is and what isn't good based off of what isn't part of creation, what leads to nothing, basically. And it forbids all of that. It just forbids things that necessarily lead us back to nothing. Genocide, slavery, censorship, stuff like that. And like I said, then the Confederation is a little bit more specific. That defines what consent is, and that's derived from the relations between the three absolutes. Personhood is derived from the sanctity and the distinction and discernibility between those three absolutes. And an act defines what it is as the result of the combination or conjunction of those three into a field of modality, which then defines what is possible from what is impossible. And the result of that is then reality as we experience it. And that is then politically reflected in the federations, which are included in the confederation. So there's one confederation, but there's three federations. There's one federation for every one of the three absolutes, and every one of those federations has their own respective mode, their own respective absolute that they are reflecting. So there's a federation that reflects nothing, there's a federation that reflects indiscernibility, and there's a federation that reflects being. And that structure from empire to confederation to federation reflects the structure of the theory of creation, of the origination of reality, as anti-modality, modality, and submodality, or universality, respectively. And that's why it has that structure. It doesn't have that structure because I just arbitrarily decided that. It has that structure because it's the political representation or reflection of the theory of how everything began, everything was created in this way, I believe, according to my theory. So that's why it has the structure that it has, and that's why the theory is so important, is because the theory is what defines why the empire is built the way that it is. And there's going to be a lot of people that argue that that's arbitrary too. And in a way, they have a point, because ultimately everything is arbitrary. If you poke at something long enough, eventually you're going to find that the person just assumed it to be true, because there is no theory that is so total that it can describe its own beginning and before its own beginning. Why did it begin there? Why didn't it begin with something else? It assumes something at its core. It assumes something at its beginning that then defines everything after that. And that's what the theory is describing. It's describing reality as if it were centered upon whatever it is that's being assumed, which are the central axioms of that theory. And every theory has one. It doesn't matter what it is. It will always be that way. And there's stuff like that that's included in the theory too, because I try to make it as true as possible. I tried to use as close as I could render it to raw deductive reasoning that I could get. And while I'm not perfect, I think that I was able to derive the pattern of aligning all of the components derived from a central axiom. Regardless of which central axiom you might choose, it will have the same kind of logically deductive pattern that emerges from it. And it will then include everything in reality, either explicitly or implicitly. But it will have its own set of relations because they'll all be centered on some other central axiom. And that's what defines each theory. And I believe that there are an infinite number of paradigms, and that the Deus Ex Machina theory is just one of an infinite number of other equally plausible theories. And eventually people will come up with more of them. But so far on this planet, as far as I know, this theory is going to be the first paradigm that touches the infinite, that makes it so that it touches everything in existence. Now, it isn't the only one that touches everything in existence, but it does touch everything in existence, which means it's sufficient for all purposes, but it isn't necessary. So you don't have to believe it, but you can. It works. It will always work. But it's not the only way to do it. There's other ways of coming to a completely different conclusion that is going to contradict my theory in application and in a theoretical model. But inside of itself, it will never contradict itself. Outside of itself, it must contradict reality at least once somewhere. They're all off by at least one position. And I know that because no one knows what the final position is. No one knows what the final puzzle piece is. No one knows what the final bit of the totality of reality could ever be. They'll never know that because reality is always growing and we don't know which direction it's going to grow in next. There's no way of predicting that. It's random. And that's one of my favorite things about evolution is that it doesn't have a predestination. It doesn't tell you, I'm gonna build this thing and then tries to do it. No, it just does whatever, and then if it survives, great, it keeps going. If it doesn't survive, it just gives up on it, moves on, and does something else random. And that's all it's ever been doing, and that's all it's ever gonna do, and I love that because it's totally free. It's the only system that you can have, a random system, that will touch every possibility and give you a totality of all possibilities if it were random. Because if it tries to predict what's in the future, it's always going to be missing something. There's always going to be something that happens that you don't expect. Always. It doesn't matter how much you know. There's going to be that bird that flies into the jet engine and you didn't expect it and you didn't see it, but it flew in there anyway. And its bill got stuck just the right way for the engine to fail. And so then you have to deal with it. And you're in the air, and you got to deal with it right then and there. And it's unexpected. And it's going to throw everybody else off, too. And then it just goes into this black swan event, and it ruins everyone's day, and blah, blah, blah. So you have to build error into any system, because it is going to fail sometimes. There are no perfect systems. So when I say it always works, I don't mean it always works perfectly. I just mean that it always will give you an answer, and that answer is never going to contradict all of the other answers that it's given in the past, which makes it theoretically perfectly true, but it's inevitably going to miss the mark in reality somewhere because the truth is trying to reflect reality. It can't be reality if it's going to reflect reality. The same way that a mirror can't be the thing that's being reflected. It has to be a mirror so that it can reflect it. And the reflection also can't be the thing that's reflected. It has to be the reflection. So likewise, the truth is never going to be reality itself. It can't ever be a clone of reality. You can't have the truth and reality be identical to each other. So then the truth is going to be slightly off. There's always going to be an error. And that's the truth of nihilism that I was getting at earlier when I said nihilism was the greatest of all the philosophies. That right there is why. It's the only theory that has it right. It says no matter what theory you come up with, it will fail to fully describe reality at least once somewhere in it. And you will not be able to know or predict where that's going to be. It's just going to happen. And it's not a reason to forsake the theory. There are no perfect theories. It just makes the theory either more or less accurate than other theories in relation to those theories. And that's the best that we can do, is just continuously update and approximate which theory has the best track record of being right the most number of times, given some scenario. Because there's going to be some theories that are really good for engineering. There's going to be some theories that are really good for logical analysis. There's going to be some theories that are really good for art, etc. But none of those theories are going to be good for everything. They're all going to have their own specialty. And then you just pick and choose whichever one that you want. All I'm doing is I'm trying to invent the very first hammer. Someone else is going to invent the screwdriver. Someone else is going to invent the jackhammer. Someone else is going to invent the saw, etc. And they're all going to fit together into some kind of society where everybody is, choosing their own job, whether it's a lumberjack using the saw, or whether it's a plumber using the wrench, or if it's a construction worker using the hammer, etc. And no one's going to tell anyone where they should work or what tool they should use. It's just going to be up to them, and it should be that way in the end. Right now, we're only going to have a hammer, so everything's going to start looking like nails, and I don't want to be nailed to a tree. I don't want to be nailed to a cross. I don't want to be that guy. So that goes back to what I was talking about. I don't want to be the Antichrist. The Antichrist is the one that sits in God's seat and says, I am God, I am the arbiter of all justice and all truth, and I am the only one that decides what is real, what is true, and what is good. And if you want to know what it is, you have to go through me. And if I say that the theory is true, and I say that the theory is the only thing that could ever be true, and I present it as if it were the infallible gospel of God, or even that I allow other people to falsely believe that, then I will be the Antichrist. And it makes perfect sense to me that that would be the case, because if I end up indoctrinating everyone to think that a viable option is the only viable option because it's my option, sounds pretty pretentious to me. It sounds like somebody usurping the light of God to me, because if I am correct, and this theory is in fact viable, then that came from the light of God. That's a way of seeing everything in reality. It's a light. And because you can see everything with it, it must be from God, light of God. But it's just my light. It's not every single possible, because everybody gets their own. Everybody gets their own little bit. Everybody gets their own piece of the pie. Well, this is my slice, but it's not the whole pie. And if I tell people it is, and they don't know any better, and this is the first time they've ever had pie, and I'm like, yeah, this is it. This is the only pie that there ever has been or ever will be, and it's mine, and it costs $49.95. Pay up. If I do that, and I could, then I'm the Antichrist. If I don't do that, I hope, holy fuck, that somehow I can escape that. Because I'm not noble enough to say that I'm going to serve God. I'm doing the right thing. I'm not. I'm a coward. I am running away from hell. I am afraid to death of that. So that is why I'm saying this. It's to save my own rotten fucking skin. And hopefully it works. So, just in case, I'm not the fucking Christ. I'm also not the Antichrist. I am what I like to call the dreamer in the dream. I am the demiurge. I am something in between. I'm just a normal guy. Until or unless I succeed in this, I'm just a normal guy anyway. But even if I did succeed in it, I really hope people don't ascribe any supernaturality to me at all and just perceive me as just some guy. Albeit somebody that succeeded in something that was pretty cool, but a guy nonetheless. And that, my stuff doesn't end up becoming taken either not seriously enough or too seriously. But that's another reason that I make these videos, is because I'm petrified that if I tried to cover this up, if I try so hard to get people to understand this theory, that I end up looking like Christ or trying to look like Christ, and then people don't see me sinning at all because I've perfected my being now, I can't go back and be a sinner, so I'm not stuck in this position because I got too pretentious and too arrogant, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll just become, perfect, quote unquote, then I can't stop doing that. And then people think that I'm the Christ. I'm thinking in the future. Not now, obviously, thank God. But, if I feel like if I don't show that, if I don't show me just being a normal guy, just being off, just being like, whatever, getting things wrong and all that stuff, if I don't show that, I'm afraid that somehow in the future I'll get stuck in this, like, mode of being where I either start believing that I'm the Christ, because it's like, oh, I've never made a mistake so far in this, period of time in the public eye. So I don't want to tarnish my image, so don't you dare say anything against me, kind of a thing. I could see me going down that path. So I leave these up to humble myself, possibly even humiliate myself in front of the public, so that I know that no one is going to be able to think that I'm the Christ, and then hopefully that will get rid of that timeline, and I won't be manifesting that timeline, because people already know better. So that's another reason I do these.